You're all set.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you could join us on this Wednesday afternoon for a webinar on Framework on Information Literacy, a community college showcase. We're really excited to have three panelists talk with us today about how they're using the framework or thinking about using the framework in their particular contexts. This is a webinar that is sponsored by the ACRL Student Learning and Information Literacy Coordinating Committee, and we're excited to have you all here. We'll also have another webinar on June 1st, and hopefully you all saw that registration information. If not, check out the email that this first announcement came out on. So today's webinar, we're going to have a panel of three speakers who will talk for about 10 to 15 minutes to showcase their particular work. And then we hope to have a good 15 minutes at the end to take questions from our panelists, from all of you via chat. And I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as we go forward. Our three panelists are Ellen Carey. She's a librarian and assistant professor at Santa Barbara City College. We also have Carlene Huxley, coordinator of library instruction at SUNY Jefferson Community College, and Anne Roselle, a faculty librarian at Phoenix College. We'll start with Anne, who will speak first, then we'll go to Carlene, and then Ellen third. So Anne is sharing her screen right now, and I'll turn off my microphone and we'll have Anne start.
Great, thank you, Sheila. Again, my name is Anne Roselle, and what you've been looking at is the picture of my beautiful library. I work at Phoenix College, which is a community college located in central Phoenix. We're part of the Maricopa County Community College District, and we have about 6,000 FTSE. Information literacy is one of our 5 general education outcomes. Right now, we, the librarians, we're not teaching credit-bearing courses, but we do work very closely with faculty through contextualized instruction. So when the framework first came out, my colleagues and I we just sort of had some casual conversations about it. We would go out and have coffee and try to make sense of it, but we weren't really sure where to start. And then it kind of hit us that we have such a good relationship with faculty across our campus that we thought, why don't we start by talking with them? So that's what we did. We hosted an invitation-only luncheon, which lasted about an hour and a half. And prior to lunch, the instructors were given that 30-page red booklet that you can buy from ACRL about the framework. And then at lunch, they got baba ganoush. And we had a great turnout. We had 24 instructors come with 4 librarians as well. And the instructors were from a variety of different disciplines. So applied technology, behavioral sciences, biology, communications, English, health professions, liberal arts, mathematics, nursing, and reading. And we had no set program. Instead, we just encouraged them to have small group conversations about which frame resonated the most with them and within their discipline. And what I thought was really fascinating was it just appeared to me as I was watching this luncheon that it was easier for them to talk about the framework than it was for us, for the librarians. At the very end, we kind of all came together as a large group, and one of the faculty brought up the idea of the CRAP test from CSU Chico that we've been using on our campus. And he suggested that we take a fresh look at it within the context of the framework. So that was the very first thing that we did on our campus. We had 7 of us get together, and we met just twice. There were 2 librarians, and then faculty from communications, reading, and health professions. And this slide, I've just highlighted in yellow some of the more noticeable changes. So I hope that you can see there's now an extra P for process. And also we changed test to detector. And this is sort of interesting about looking at the framework because we realized that calling it a test might be giving the wrong impression to students that information is good or bad. And the framework makes you realize it's really much more complex than that. And so we wanted students to be detectives and that this could be one tool that they could use. This next slide, this is the R of relevance, and I'm just showing this in yellow that we added some additional questions for students to think about, such as, how does using this source help me understand the larger conversation about this research question? Here's one more slide. This is the authority, the A authority, and you'll notice that we're pretty much taking verbatim language from the framework related to type of authority. This semester, I was lucky enough to observe a reading instructor who introduced the crap detector in her class. She had an assignment where students had to evaluate a single article that they found on their own using this tool. And at the end of the class, a student approaches her and he asks her if she could create for him a real short, quick checklist. He was not happy with the crap detector. And she paused and she thought for a second and she said, the thing is, it should be complicated. And she proceeded to have a conversation with that student about the complexity of information. And what I was really struck with was that the student seemed to accept it, and he left feeling good about using that crap detector. So now we've had a really positive experience with the luncheon and a good experience redoing the crap test. And this really boosted Phoenix College librarians' confidences with the framework. So we proceeded to create a draft of a new set of learning outcomes. And right now this draft is 2 pages, and we expect it'll be a little shorter in its final form. It's still a draft because we're testing these out through the different classes through our contextualized instruction. Thinking about questions like, can we teach this? Can students learn these bigger ideas? And can we assess this learning? And I'd like to share with you one example of a recent change I made to a class in dental hygiene just this semester. I made this change in a dental hygiene theory class, and the students are asked to write a medical conditions report. They're each assigned a specific condition or disease, and then they have to conduct research to learn more about the condition as well as the dental considerations. The report has to include APA references and in-text citations, and they have to use at least one peer-reviewed journal article. So my learning outcomes prior to the framework, I basically, by the end of the session, I wanted the students to know when they needed an in-text citation and that they would walk away with that peer-reviewed journal article. Then what happened is, post-frame work, I added 3 additional learning outcomes. And you'll notice in red, I put the students will begin to identify different types of authority, recognize that credibility may vary by context and need, and appreciate that knowledge can be expressed in different formats. The way I approached this was that I broke students into small groups, and each group got a little slip of paper. And on the paper was a condition as well as some questions. And I'm asking students, who are the individuals, groups, organizations that have expertise and credibility on that particular medical condition? Who are the interested parties that might produce answers to those questions? And I explained to the students that thinking about this helps you determine where to look for information, but also prepares you when you come across something, like in a Google search, as an authority. The students were instructed to write out their answers using Padlet, that virtual blank wall. And let me tell you, that wall very quickly got filled up. So students, some of them just said things broadly like doctors. Other groups got more specific with gynecologists, St. Jude Children's Hospital. Again, sometimes broad answers like government, or more specific, the CDC. And then they listed different patients as well. And it was seriously a wild time. It was a lot of fun. But the important part here was it opened the door for us to talk about different types of authority, credibility, and context, and why you might want to use one source over another. And then the second stage of the activity is I had to group those prior answers by type of authority, and I had to do this really quickly, and I came up with 6 categories. So, federal agencies, professional organizations, practitioners, patients, so forth. And then I asked the students, how did these authorities publish, disseminate, and share their knowledge? And fortunately, very naturally, the peer-reviewed journal article came up, which was important because they have to find peer-reviewed journal articles. And I really let the students lead this conversation. So I'm typing on Padlet just whatever they're saying in terms of the publishing and disseminating of information. We had another conversation then about why some platforms are used over others. What are their strengths and limitations? And how does this impact how we think about information and how we use it? And then I was able to finish up with a really, thanks to the New Literacy Alliance, I could finish with a little recap with a video that was less than 2 minutes about types of authority. And then the class proceeded into locating a scholarly peer-reviewed journal. So that activity was 20 minutes out of a 75-minute class. At the very end, I asked students to anonymously answer one question using Google Forms. Would you agree or disagree with this statement? The peer-reviewed scholarly article is the best source for any information need, and why? 6 students got it wrong. 30% said, yes, of course. And then I also have 14 students, 70%, who disagreed with that statement and responded more thoughtfully. And I suspect this is too much text for you to read, but I'm just going to read one of the comments to you. The student wrote, no, I feel that the federally regulated agencies have a comprehensive field of experts who will independently provide factual data in their studies that are least likely to be biased. And I found this comment really interesting because it clearly came out of a discussion that arose about publish or perish and questioning companies that fund medical and dental research studies. We talked about what happens when research findings don't support using a product. Would they be less likely to be disseminated? So just a really interesting conversation. And honestly, I like that not all the students got this right because the framework presents bigger ideas that aren't always simple to grasp in a single class session. I'm going to share one more example, and I think what it's showing is how one of the greatest impacts of the framework is how it can open new ways to work with faculty. There are 2 reading instructors here at Phoenix College who are working on redesigning a section of CRE 101, which is a critical reading and thinking class, and they're redesigning it with a focus on healthcare. These 2 instructors also attended that framework luncheon. So as they're thinking about doing this redesign, they thought, hey, this is a perfect time to integrate the framework. So they invited me into their work. And we started by looking at the CRE 101 course competencies. And that's what you're seeing on the screen. Again, I apologize if it's too much text, but I just draw your attention to the red text. What we're doing here is we're identifying which frames go with which of the competencies. So there were 4 frames that worked for us. And we also looked at the ACRL Nursing Information Literacy Standards. When we looked more closely at the course outline, and some of the alignment's really just perfect. So on the left-hand side there in the black text, that's the course outline. Author stance, tone, purpose, audience, context, which is a really obvious overlap with authority is constructed and contextual. Where it really gets interesting is when you're using the framework and you discover that what you were doing in the past no longer makes sense. So here's an example. The course outline, again in black ink there, it's talking about the research process, and then it says types of sources, internet, library database, print. Well, these categories don't make any sense, right? And that's not how you approach the research process. So as soon as we started applying searching as strategic exploration, the reading instructors could clearly see that the outline was outdated and needs to be revised by our district reading instructional council. We're still in the early process of putting together this course, but I'm encouraged by how well I'm seeing it develop. And again, it's just fascinating to me how the instructors are comfortable talking about the framework. This is my last slide. And in preparing for this webinar, I asked my colleague, Christine Moore, where do you think we are at Phoenix College with the framework? And she answered, if the framework was a car, we've taken the car out of the garage, we've backed it out onto the driveway, and the engine is still running. But we're not quite cruising down the road yet. So I want to leave you with one last thought. For those of you who haven't taken the car out of the garage yet, I want to encourage you to take that test drive. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. We'll move on to Carlene Huxley next. Carlene, I'm not sure if your microphone's unmuted quite yet.
Can you still not hear me?
We can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I was going to talk about a little bit how we're using the framework to actually completely redesign our information literacy program. It kind of came about, the framework itself kind of came about at a time on our campus when a lot of the different programs were starting to realize that they needed to integrate a little more information literacy into their curriculum. And this had kind of been an issue that we've been dealing with for quite some time. But the conversation was always very, very heavily focused on just this concept of assessment, and you're mandated to do this, so you have to do this. So the conversation with people was always kind of a downer. So when the framework came about, we sort of felt as though it gave us a way to kind of, obviously reframe things, but to use a different type of language with them that ended up kind of like with Anne was really surprising. They tended to connect with it a lot better than the way that they had in the past. There were a couple of main challenges that we've always had on our campus in terms of how they perceived us, the librarians in the library, and also information literacy in general. And one of them was that you always heard them saying something like, well, my course doesn't include a research project, so we don't need to have library instruction. Or don't they get all of that in English 101, which is the research and composition class. But then we also had another problem. We had a lot of people who, or a lot of faculties who did use us very consistently for a number of different courses. So you might end up with a handful of students or some students that actually ended up coming to us multiple times during the semester. So then what we told them was very repetitive. So we were also trying to find a way for us to sort of start this conversation with faculty about scaffolding things or finding different ways to, prevent that type of thing from happening. So this is what kind of ended up happening. We have liaison departments. So we went to our departments, and we didn't want to just all of a sudden say, hey, we have the framework and now we need to do this. Because honestly, our first impression of the framework was also, okay, this is a little weird. But then when we actually started presenting it to people and talking to people about it, we realized how the conversation was changing. Instead of asking people or telling them, your students need to find a peer-reviewed article, we start talking to them about, hey, do your students know how knowledge is shared and debated and so on in your discipline? So that was really great. We really enjoyed that because we finally felt like we had made a connection with them. So then we went out and we decided that we were going to create this big, huge plan. So this is our little, mini, basic draft of a strategic plan for an actual information literacy program. We've never had like a quote unquote program before, and we don't necessarily have one now, but we decided that, we're just going to step up and really start to look at ourselves as an actual program on campus. So basically what we're trying to work on at the moment is the assessment part of it, because we felt that's where we really needed to start, was to actually create a new set of learning outcomes based off of the framework. So we started with the backwards concept. Who are our students? What do they seem to know or not know when they come in? What do we want our students to know before they graduate? And for us, being a two-year community college, this would also mean not just graduating and then transferring to a new college, but graduating and perhaps never going back to college at all. So what do they need to know to just get out there in the real world, and what do they need to know to succeed in the four-year institution afterwards? And we let the framework inspire us, but we didn't stress over it. We didn't let it dictate anything. So what that ended up resulting in is really a set of student learning outcomes that probably didn't look that much different from our old ones. And we were fine with that because we sort of figured that we were going to have to do this in phases. You know, the one new thing that we kept talking a lot about, and we had gotten feedback from faculty, was this concept of students doing a research on a topic, but then not putting the effort into understanding that when the research goes wrong or they can't find something, figuring out how to go back and reflect on what they've done and how they need to change things, whether it be change to a different database or change keywords. That tended to be the part of research, the research process that they tended to miss. So we added this one student learning outcome that just focused on nothing but just that reflection part. Students will learn the importance of reflecting on the research process as a way of identifying any information gaps and additional lines of inquiry. So you probably recognize that as something that came directly from the framework. So what we did is, again, we wanted to try to figure out a way that we could take these student learning outcomes and then sort of inspire the different departments to integrate that into whatever courses or curriculum that they had. So we're trying to find an easy way to do that rather than just give them this document and say, hey, this is what they need to know. We decided to kind of create this rubric that came with a scoring sheet. And this is actually an idea that was directly taken from Claremont College. They have something called the 5 Critical Habits of Mind. And at first, it just looks like a basic rubric. But the part that I really liked was the fact that it has this scoring sheet at the back. So you can essentially hand this to a faculty, or the librarian can use it, and you can assess an artifact, whether it be an annotated bibliography or whatever it is that they've done for an assignment, and then actually score it based off of those different outcomes. So our idea initially was that, well, we can hand this and share it with departments, and perhaps they can use it to assess information literacy for their department's sake, and then perhaps they can also hand it over to us so we can do something a little more, you know, campus-wide. At least that was the thought at the time. So we took it to the English department, and they tested it out for a summer. I actually formed a little task force with the English department with just a couple of the faculty members there who seemed really, really interested in this. And the feedback from them was really crucial. And it did result in some tweaking in the rubric and in the outcomes themselves, because we finally figured out that that reflection piece is really a difficult thing to be able to assess from, say, just an annotated bibliography. I mean, you really need something very specific to be able to assess that. So this is what we ended up with as our new sets, and we decided not to even call them outcomes. We decided to call them student learning competencies, and then we categorized them. And then underneath each competency, we would have another set of more specific student learning outcomes. So I have them for each 5 of them, but I'm just giving you one example. So for example, this is what the student learning outcomes underneath the inquiry competency would be. So the idea now was to see if maybe we could get, you know, have this document again, but then realizing that not every course is going to need to know everything that's on that rubric, but they can at least look at it and decide, okay, well, for this particular assignment, they need to know everything in that first competency, and then maybe a couple in the second competency, and all of number 5, or just basically look through it themselves and choose what they want. So our hope with this is that we could actually create some sort of a collaborative discussion with assignment design, being able to create an assignment with that course that would help, actually, help them with these particular, or help the students with these particular skills. And then the final part of that was we needed to create some sort of information literacy tutorial. And the reason why this is so crucial for us is because where we're located, we're in Watertown, New York, and we also have a military base up here. So Watertown is very rural. We have, and with the military base itself, we have a lot of distance learning students. So for many, many years, we've realized that the students who are distance learning students are not getting the same type of treatment or help in terms of, library instruction or information literacy as those who actually come to campus. So we're really trying to create this whole new tutorial, and we're going to be using LibWizard for it. So we can create, kind of replicate some of the interactive, activities that we do in class through the tutorial as well. And by categorizing them the way that we did, we sort of figured that that will also help us to organize the tutorial and then hopefully to kind of assess the distance learning students too when they complete the tutorial. So, so far, we've, the framework really has helped to make us think differently. We're really excited about our instruction again, and we're trying new things in our course or in their classes. Even the, like I said, the faculty seem to be really excited about library instruction now too. So that alone has really been a huge benefit for us. We're going to be using the new rubric with the new set of competencies that we created for another couple of English classes and also one discipline, a History 150, at the end of this spring to see how that works out. And we realize it's going to be messy, but we're prepared for that. We figure that we're going to have to do this a couple of times before it really comes out right. We're also collaborating with developmental courses right now to co-teach like for a couple of classes in that particular course that focuses on information literacy. And that's a huge thing for us because we don't have any type of credit-bearing courses on campus. And to actually be able to work with another faculty member to come in there and teach not just a one-shot, but a 1 week, 2 week type of thing, really kind of opens up a lot of possibilities for us. So our next steps that we've been talking about, at least so far, is we want to use those liaison relationships that we have to actually go to the different departments and say, okay, so here's the stuff that we've created. Here's what we feel students need to know. But now we want to hear what you think your students need to know in your discipline. So why don't I help you design some outcomes that are a little more specific either to your course or to your particular department. So we really want to try to push that whole scaffolding idea. And to try to help keep that good relationship with our faculty, we're also trying to help them understand that we're not trying to come in here and force something on them or make them understand that we want them to work with us for this entire project. And also very specifically to understand that just because they don't have a research paper or any type of writing assignment in their class, it doesn't mean that they can't teach some information literacy in their course. So we have lots of ideas right now to sort of help them with, one-shot assignment design stuff that, they wouldn't even necessarily have to bring their students into the library. We could just sort of work together and create an assignment for them to do in their class. And like I said, we want to make sure that they know that we're here to help them and that we want their feedback and we want to know, what they feel is important for their students to know. And that is actually all I have. I set up just a free website where I've actually put some of these documents so you can see the full document that has all of the competencies and all of the outcomes on it. It is still draft form. And I have a couple of other things on there too, some different links to different places and tutorials and websites and people who have really inspired some of our own thinking and directed some of our own efforts here too. So we may want to look at that later.
Thank you, Carlene. So our third panelist will be Ellen Carey.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Ellen.
Great, let me just share my screen.
Carlene, you'll have to pass the ball to her.
Sorry. Did you get it?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so it's actually great going last because I can refer back to some of what Anne and Carlene talked about. And Carlene, what you've done is what we're aspiring to, especially around creating the more specific learning outcomes and developing tutorials around that. We're going to do some of that over the summer. But right now, what I'm going to talk about, what we've done so far, is not so much about brand new content, but more about a shift in perspective. And I think that's been the most powerful thing in terms of our using the framework, is how our just a small shift in perspective in our instruction can make all, oh, I just missed the punchline of that slide. Let's do that again. Just huge difference. So the timing of the framework was really great for us because it happened to coincide with a process that our college was going through to revise our institutional student learning outcomes. And just shortly after, within months after the framework was first available in early 2015, we were invited through our college faculty governance process to participate in the process of revising our ISLO 5, which is Information Technology and Media Literacy. So this is the old version from 2007, and this is the version we came up with, and you can see from the highlighted parts in green that we embedded some of the actual language from the framework. We emphasized more the strategically searching for information, approaching research as an ongoing process of inquiry, considering how information is valued in different disciplines, and looking at the creation and use of information across various media and formats. And these, in addition to coming up with actually updated outcomes, the process of engaging with faculty, like Anne and Carlene have both said, is, and we find that the framework really resonates with them. And not only that, but it helps to reinforce the notion that we are educators, just as the faculty are, that we have a discipline that has our own pedagogical standards and intellectual thought, and we're not just teaching students, which database to choose and what to type into the search box. And in general, we have a really great relationship with our faculty. Librarians are faculty on our campus, and so it's not that we were completely marginalized, which has been the case at some other community colleges I've worked at. But so we had a good relationship, and engaging around the framework has made it get even better, has improved it even more. So these are some posters that the college did this whole sort of marketing campaign around the updated institutional learning outcomes. These posters are placed in various places around campus. Each semester there's been a focus on one of the institutional learning outcomes. This one is actually going to be the focus this coming fall, which we're hoping is going to coincide with our launching some online tutorials that I'm going to be working on over the summer. We've just subscribed to the Credo InfoLit modules, and we're going to be doing a lot of customization. So there's campus talk about student learning outcomes, and our being able to participate in the development of the specific language for the ISLO and also for these posters, a better position to be having those one-on-one conversations with faculty who request instruction, who may still be thinking of the library in terms of a place where students just need to go and get a tour or get oriented or learn those very specific skills, rather than learn to think more critically about information. And this is just a quote I found that I think expresses what we're trying to do. We're not just training students to perform something, we're also wanting them to really understand why they're doing what they're doing, and why they're they're being asked to think about the concepts that we're asking them to think about. But we have to do both, obviously. They still need to know which database to go to and what to type into the search box. So our focus is really concept-based teaching and learning, so focusing on the content and the skills that they still need to learn, but also examining bigger ideas, connecting that content and skills to concepts that are even beyond the framework, concepts that they're going to be thinking about in other classes or in their lives. So that's something we have tried to do in the actual instruction, is to give them experiences that relate what we're asking them to think of to something they've experienced, not necessarily in school. So this is an activity that I do in many classes now. Beginning of class, students come in, at different times. As students are coming in, I ask them to draw the research process in the form of a picture, map, diagram, whatever. One of my favorites, because it was funny but also poignant, was a student who drew a picture of himself crying. This isn't the actual picture, this is clip art, but we were able to have a laugh about that as a class and a conversation. Why does the thought of the research process make you cry? And I will say also, for students who have not had any experience with research, we ask them to do this activity around a time that they needed some kind of information in their personal life, and what were the steps that they went through, or the process they went through in order to get that information. So everyone comes up obviously with something different. Sometimes it's an image, sometimes it's a list, a diagram, and then we combine those on the board and have a conversation about how the research process is not necessarily a linear process, how we all have different approaches. It's not necessarily that one of those is right or wrong, but go back and revisit past steps. And we find that students are really engaged in this to a much greater degree than in the past, when we might have said, okay, here are the steps in the research process. This is what you need to do. Soliciting their thoughts on what that process looks like and feels like to them has been just that important shift in approach that seems to be working. Another example, the concept of conversations have rules. So not just scholarship is conversation, but also authority is constructed and contextual. These images actually come from one of our writing center staff, who created a PowerPoint for students to talk about how social media conversations have rules. So how do you react when someone posts something and the only person responding is that same person? And usually the student response to this is, oh, that's sad. How do you respond if you can't tell who's talking, versus how do you respond if the people who are talking have some kind of credibility that you're aware of? So just this little example, and we have found actually through this that most of our students are no longer on Facebook, but most of them are on some kind of social media. And having a conversation about this, jumping into that conversation of scholarship as conversation, and sort of what are the rules for social media versus what are the rules for the way scholars use each other's ideas and cite them, and all of that, and whose ideas do you get to use. And this can also generate conversation about which ideas are dismissed or excluded from the conversation, which voices are silenced. So that's another example. Another one, fake news. This is from our credit-bearing Library 101 class. It's a one-credit class that is one of the 2 classes on campus that meets the information competency requirement. And so we added a discussion that or actually adapted a discussion that was already there on filter bubbles, where they watched Eli Pariser's TED Talk. And starting this semester, in my section, I had them also read one of many articles about fake news and talk in an online discussion post about what they learned from that, the fake news article and the filter bubble video. And this was one of my favorite student quotes. I didn't think I was affected by fake news, but boy, was I wrong. And of the discussion, I think I only had one student who said, yeah, it doesn't affect me. But everyone else was surprised. I had students who were testing out the concept of filter bubbles by going home and doing searches side by side with their roommates at the same time and being completely astonished that their results lists were different. And so then this leads to a larger conversation about information creation as a process, and it gives them that personal experience of that phenomenon, about how information is valued, how it's accessed, how authority is constructed and contextual, how information is created. So they have some personal relationship and some mental model for that when we're asking them to consider those concepts around resources that they might be less familiar with. And then finally, this is one that we only do in one class. We do 4 sessions with a Social Science 101 class, which is a survey of the social sciences. And I haven't quite figured out how to do this activity in other classes, but it's extremely popular in Social Science 101, and we're able to do it because we have so much more time with the students. So I did not take a picture of the actual bags of goodies, but they're about
Ellen, I think your voice cut out.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. I think
okay.
The last like 15 seconds or so.
Oh, sorry about that. So they are tasked with organizing these collections of foods according to a classification scheme that they identify. And they are told they need to sell that classification scheme to the rest of the class as the best way to organize these items. And they come up with great things like organizing them by color, organizing them by nutritional value, separating fruits and vegetables, and then they'll have debates about what counts as a fruit and what counts as a vegetable. But the overall message is that the information can be organized and is organized in different ways, and that this relates to both the values we place on particular aspects of that information. It's related to authority. We go into a discussion of subject headings, but we find that the subject
Ellen, we lost your audio again.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm using a headset and there must be some problem with it. So, well, I'm just about to wrap up anyway, but and I'm not sure what everyone missed, but basically the categorization just gets them thinking about how humans organize information, and it's not that information is sort of naturally existing, naturally occurring, organized in certain ways. We also show a 2-minute TED Talk on different, it's called Weird or Just Different, on different ways that people organize the world, such as in the United States, streets having names versus in Japan, blocks having names. So how do we know it's working? We haven't done any formal assessment of this new approach at this point, but the anecdotal evidence that we have from both the students and faculty is that it's more popular, that the students are more engaged, getting more out of these sessions, and most of the faculty are also seeing the importance of engaging around information literacy concepts on a different level than research. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Ellen. So I've been keeping an eye on the chat for questions or comments that folks have been having, but if you have more, please do add them. But I'll kick it off with one of them that might be a little connected here for any of our panelists that could talk. There's a couple questions about uptake with faculty in the trades, or if anybody, or if anybody's able to successfully reach out and engage with adjunct instructors in this regard.
Hey, this is Anne. I can comment about that, you working with the adjuncts. I think that's an excellent question because that is really challenging. One thing, if you can, adjuncts will, they're very busy and they don't get paid what they're worth, right? So if you could have an event that you could get your administration to pay for their time. So we oftentimes will have an event on a Saturday and we'll go. That could open the conversation. So if you could do something, have them come for an hour or an hour and a half, and if you could get your administration to pay them for that time on a Saturday, that could start the conversation. And then, again, having that flexibility for the follow-up conversations, you might have to come in the evening or early hours to meet their unique work schedule.
Hi, this is Carlene. I can actually speak to that as well because we have the same problem. We have a very, very high percentage of adjuncts. And kind of along the lines of what Anne was saying, we do actually have what we call an adjunct orientation. And it's not just us, it's actually something that happens at the beginning of the semester. It's after hours, so I have to stay a little later for it. Which is fine, but the problem is that most adjuncts already have full-time jobs elsewhere, so this is the only time they can do it. But it's usually me, our director, the tutoring staff, because we actually work with the tutoring staff, the writing tutors, the math tutors here, and several other people on campus. So it's not just a library thing; it's sort of a services on campus for students and adjuncts as a whole orientation. So we get about 15, 20 minutes where we can talk to them about library instruction.
I'll add something if everyone can hear me. We haven't really done a lot of outreach with adjuncts that we don't already work with, but one thing that we have been trying to do, honestly, even since before the framework, is when instructors ask for some kind of library instruction and they use terms like orientation or tour, we always use the language research workshop, and I'm the coordinator of instruction, and so I will have a conversation with them either over the phone or by email that sort of gets at our philosophy and that where our emphasis is critical thinking. So I think that over time that sort of outreach has started to change the culture a little bit about the expectations that our faculty in general, including our adjuncts, have about the type of instruction that the library offers.
Carlene, we had a question about why did you change your terminology from outcomes to competencies? Could you answer that?
Yeah, sure. That actually stemmed from the fact, if you remember me saying how in the beginning we really didn't want to stress out too much about whether or not the framework was in what we had created, but we kind of felt, the framework is each frame is so, the way that they titled it is so metaphorical. They're metaphors, and so we wanted to make sure that we could stay away from that, just because it wasn't that our faculty didn't understand it, but it was really more for our administration to be able to clearly understand what we wanted. But then we also realized that when we made the first ones, some of them were broad and vague, and some of them are pretty specific, and it was kind of a mixture of both. So we felt like we wanted the competencies to be sort of a broad concept of a broad skill that they needed to be able to do that would require many skills, and then the outcomes underneath that would be the more, more measurable, more specific stuff that we wanted to measure. Whether we're doing this correctly, whether this is by the book, whether that is correct to do that, I can't really say. But luckily, we don't have an administration that's nitpicky about those things. Our main concern really was to try to figure out a way to communicate this best with the stakeholders and with faculty. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. And could you speak, so there was one of your outcomes that the students will begin to. Could you talk a little bit about the assessment that you're doing?
Oh, rats, I can't believe you're asking that question. Yeah, we haven't quite moved into the assessment. So the assessment I did for that class, it was just that one question. That was my little assessment, just to see if they got that concept that about the periodical, the peer-reviewed journal. So I don't have a good answer to that question about assessment. So we have not really pursued that yet in a great detail, besides doing like a 1-minute paper kind of thing.
Fair enough. And then there was a question about who does the teaching for your CRE 101?
Oh, yes. So we have a reading department, and so that particular class I was talking about is 2 instructors, I think, are going to kind of co-teach it, and then I'll come in for maybe 2 sessions to focus on the information literacy components to it.
Carlene, there was a question about if you could share an example of a one-shot assignment design that you're using in a course without a research component. You could expound upon that.
Yeah, I did actually share an example in the chat too. There's a link if anybody would like to view it. But the one that I've included in the chat actually came from a math class. And math is not one that we get a whole lot of information for. But luckily, I'd already kind of established a relationship with a math teacher through a committee that I was on, and she was talking about a particular assignment that she was doing with her students, where she wanted them to be able to find some statistics, some interesting statistics. And of course, she said that she was just having them use Google, but that they were often having a hard time finding the right type of statistics, because she wanted them to be able to find stuff to create a linear graph. So first I had to have her explain that, because I'm not a math person. So when she explained that to me, then I realized that really what would have benefited her is if the students could use Statista, which is one of the databases that we got a couple of years ago. It's just full of nothing but statistics. So together we worked on a specific assignment that they had to complete. They could start it at the end of my instruction, and then need to turn into her by a certain period. Then also my part of this too is it opened up the opportunity for me to not just show them the point and click stuff in Statista, but to also show them or talk to them about authority and statistics, and open up that whole information cycle thing, and how peer review comes into play, blah, blah, blah. So it was a very small, simple discussion and a small activity, but it was probably more than what those students would have gotten if they hadn't actually come for instruction. So that's one minor, example that we hope to kind of expand upon with talking with people who are in different disciplines that wouldn't naturally always have some sort of a writing assignment to do.
Thanks. I know Ellen is in the chat talking about a little bit about the time devoting to the drawing activity. Ellen, there's a question about what Library 101 was, and then an inquiry if you'd be willing to share the fake news article you're using. Ellen, is your microphone still muted? All right, it seems like we're having some trouble with Ellen's microphone. Something to open up to all you. Somebody had a question about how do you juggle concepts and critical thinking in these one-shot situations when they also need database skills, so the timing. If any of the panelists would like to talk about that.
Okay, I'm going to jump on that one because that is one that we have discussed endlessly amongst me and the other 2 librarians that I work with, because it is really difficult. But the one thing that we are finding more and more of is that it's actually us who's more uncomfortable with it, with the idea of not fitting in all of the stuff that we want to fit in, that we traditionally did fit in. And that sometimes it's actually better if you teach them the critical thinking part and then leave them to explore some of the extra elements of a database on their own. And perhaps develop those particular skills over time, because it's the critical thinking part that they're probably not going to be able to get by themselves. But figuring out how to filter a list in a database is probably something, even if I don't get to it in class, it is probably something that they will eventually figure out. I'm not saying that they definitely will, but we sort of had to come to terms with that we just simply, we just could not cover everything, which is why we're really trying to push hard for this scaffolding idea with the faculty, so we can kind of break those components and concepts up on varying different levels according to different disciplines as well. So it is a really tough one.
Anne or Ellen, any thoughts?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Got rid of my headset. Yeah, you spend less time in many classes on the nuts and bolts of the databases, but I also agree that the bigger ideas that we're engaging with, the bigger conceptual discussions, are better preparing students than in a session, than those extra 20 minutes that we would have spent showing them how to do that limit that we didn't get to or whatever. So it's a constant balance, and we're always tweaking it, and it depends on the class too. If we're in a developmental class, we might actually spend more time on the searching process if that's something that the students have never encountered a library catalog or a database before.
All right, thank you. So I know that we're wrapping up our hour. I want to have all of you join me in thanking our panelists. I've learned a great deal, and I'm sure all of you have left with some ideas too for your own institution. I want to just remind you that this is an ACRL webinar sponsored by the Student Learning and Information Literacy Committee, and we have another webinar on Thursday, June 1st at noon with Meredith. The speaker will be Meredith Farkas, from the faculty librarian from Portland Community College, the Slovenia campus. And the title of her presentation will be Framework Freakout, How to Stop Worrying and Live with a Framework. It should be an interesting presentation. So thanks for joining us. This will be archived and posted after today's presentation. Elois has let me know that probably within a day or two, and it'll be sent out, and we'll be living off of the Student Learning Information Literacy website as well. Thank you all for joining us today for this hour webinar, and have a good afternoon. Thank you, Ellen, Anne, and Carlene. That was really wonderful.